That right there is the 2020 Toyota GR Supra. We're at the drive event for the car, so that means we finally get behind the wheel. A couple caveats before we do though. One, we're gonna be driving a couple varieties of this, so the color and interior may change magically. Also, it's a little windy out, so you have to bear with some audio issues. Before we get started, make sure you hit subscribe and visit edmunds.com to find your next perfect car. Well, let's get driving, shall we? 2020 Toyota Supra. Finally, it's here. And I've done some lapping sessions already with this car, and I can tell you, I like it. It's really fun to drive for a lot of different reasons, which all require a lot of explanation. But the too long didn't watch version of this review is, I enjoy driving this car. And that's what matters when it comes to sports cars, isn't it? Okay, so this started life as the BMW Z4, but Toyota's insistent that early in development, they forked into two different directions and did not maintain contact as they developed each car. The goal of that was to make sure that they behaved like two different cars. And though I haven't driven the Z4 on track quickly, I can tell you this feels like a fast BMW. Now, that may sound like a complaint, but it's not, and for reasons I'll get back to in a bit. I'll say the reason I enjoy this is because it has a lot of things going for it. The first is a very responsive engine. This turbo straight six generates a ton of torque very quickly in the power band. And what that does is it allows you to leave corners in higher gears than you might think you need to. We went to second there, but we probably didn't need to. Could have scooted out in third. It also smacks the rear tires with torque, which makes this car do my second favorite thing, oversteer. This is a rather neutral handling car. In second and third gear corners, you can expect a pretty heavy dose of oversteer. And it's one that's enjoyable, but also always there. And I'm frankly surprised that Toyota, of all companies, is gonna make a sports car with this kind of setup, with this kind of neutrality in it. Just because, you know, for an amateur driver, it may feel a little overwhelming. I think it's the right amount though. I think it's really fun. And fortunately, the stability control can be there to help you drive through that. We have the stability control off, and that speaks to the other attributes of this car that I like. The first is the control of the chassis and the steering. We have to talk about how this thing sounds. It's terrific. It's a loud turbo straight six. Not only is it loud in here, it's loud outside. You can hear it pop and all that fun stuff when you're flying by a crowd of people at your local show and shine. Woo-hoo-hoo. And that's really enjoyable. I can't imagine why you would need to put an aftermarket exhaust on this car. You can, and people probably will. I just don't really see the need. It's this. That's really fun. That's really fun. Now that somebody's out of our way, we can really dig into the throttle. Oh boy, that feels good. And this thing cooks. The power band feels strong all the way to its 6,500 RPM redline. That's a really important thing because the torque arrives so early. They're claiming 1,600 RPM is when peak torque comes in. I forget peak power RPM off the top of my head, but this thing will pull all the way into its redline, and you won't really notice it because the motor's pulling so strong when you hit redline. Downshift here. Now, when I say it's not necessarily a bad thing that this drives like a BMW, it's a nice, fun, oversteery BMW, that's not really a complaint. This is probably the least expensive M-like driving experience you can get in a new car. Think about it that way. When I asked the chief engineer of this car what their main competitor was, what he considered it, he immediately answered Porsche Cayman S. They were so focused on the vehicle, they actually bought one for their competitive fleet every single model year so they could chart the changes and watch the evolution of it and see what Porsche did to make it tick. That kind of focus, you think it's going to turn into something that drives really fun or drives really well, and it does here. But it's also an interesting target for the Supra. Supra has never been a light, nimble, lithe sports car like the Boxster and Cayman are. It's a front-engine, rear-drive bruiser. This is a small car, but it doesn't feel like it. It doesn't drive like it. Oh yeah, that's good. So this has a distinct driving characteristic that's very un-Boxster-like. Is that okay? I think it is. It'd be boring if all cars behaved the same way. This is very enjoyable, very fun, but also very different. Of course, we have the usual array of adaptive and advanced tech. We have adaptive dampers that change their window of operation based off you're in normal setting or sports setting. We have an active differential that's constantly adjusting the torque left and right. It can do a lot of trick things very quickly with how it controls the bias of power between each wheel. And the nice thing is not only do you have the adjustability from the oversteery kind of nature of this car, it gives you an additional sense of control. It's not a one-dimensional handling or two-dimensional handling car. When you can use the oversteer to your advantage and drive through it, that gives you another tool in your pocket for driving fast, which I really like. You can lift up the throttle to help turn in more on corners when you've got the line slightly wrong. It's just another tool in your disposal. And advanced drivers, I'm sure, will appreciate that. You always get that little nudge, and that's really fun. I was hesitant of the Supra, how it could perform, how it would feel like based on 1, how it looks, 2, its connection with BMW, and 3, overall, the spec chart, which isn't that impressive compared to every other sports car that costs about 50 grand. But I gotta say, the driving sensation almost makes up for it. This is really fun. And it's fun in a way I'd like to explore a lot more. Whether you're gonna be able to explore this kind of oversteer on a winding track or a winding road at home is a different question, but here on a racetrack, I'm really having a good time. I really like the engine response. The steering has some nice advantages going for it. The brakes, I'm not sure if they'll survive track use. They are getting a little soft as even during this lapping. We have a lot of people rotating through these cars, but overall, a solid, enjoyable driving experience that I think Supra fans should look forward to. We've already seen the debates online and given our take on the Supra's design. It's questionable, I think, at best, but instead of talking at length about that, because we already know that, let's talk about some other details that we found since looking at the car. When you pop the hood, hey, yeah, there's the turbocharged straight 6, but when you look around at details, you start seeing some interesting things, especially these stick out. There's a hole here and a hole here. They're both threaded, and this area on the airbox is scalloped, and it's like there should be a brace there or something. Well, there was at one point, and Toyota decided they didn't want it because they thought the handling characteristics it brought were undesirable. So they removed it, but allowed the aftermarket to install those places if they want to, make their own handling changes. There's a couple other areas where they've done that too. There's large spaces for a larger transmission cooler, and there's space for a differential cooler if you're so inclined to install one. It's a nice nod to the aftermarket, which has been such a fan of the Supra for a long time. Now, when we talk wheels and tires, they're 19 inches front and rear, but a staggered setup. Most importantly, they're forged aluminum. That's going to help keep the weight down, especially the unsprung mass. Very important. 9 inches wide in the front, 10 inches wide in the rear. But as we pass through here, we said we weren't going to talk about styling, but what is this? It just doesn't work, either in photo or in the flesh. It's a separate piece. You can see it's just kind of stuck on there. Hopefully the aftermarket can take care of that too. But as we get to the back, my favorite part of the Supra, this just looks great, I think, to my eyes. I love the spoiler. I love the taillight design. And even though there's a lot of parts on it that I think are confusing, I think the drive more than makes up for them. I like driving the Supra, and I mentioned that it reminds me of a BMW in many ways. And I think the strongest way is the interior. I mean, listen when I turn this thing on. That chime. The exhaust sounds cool, but that chime is 100% BMW. Steering wheel, BMW. Shifter, BMW. Entertainment system, BMW. Climate controls, BMW. All these buttons right here, BMW. Everything is BMW. It even smells like a new BMW in here. It's weird. It's not bad, it's just strange, because who's going to complain about having the interior of a BMW in their Toyota for way less money than the equivalent, performance model of BMW? I'm sure not. The only obvious Toyota parts in here are the center of the steering wheel, the airbag cover, it's got a big Toyota logo on it, and the gauge cluster, which is a nice digital display with a big centrally located tachometer, digital speedo. It's all very nice and easy to read. Interesting though, from the driver's seat, This is a small interior. It's only 2 seats. It's not like the 2+2 of previous models. This only has 2 seats, and it feels small inside of a big car. This is not a big car. It's a small car. It's approximately the size of a Toyota 86, but it feels bigger than that. And I think that has to do with a couple things. The steering wheel diameter is larger than I think it should be. Toyota says they had to do this because of airbag restrictions. They needed a certain size airbag, and that requires a certain size wheel. The thickness of the rim, though, is actually tiny compared to what you'd find in a performance BMW, and I prefer that. The hood line kind of swells up, and the dash is tall too, and the roof line is low. When you get in and out, you can easily bang your head against the roof. In fact, when you have the helmet on, if you're doing a track day, there's not a ton of room to maneuver around. So all those things add up and make for an interior that feels small, though the car feels larger than that. And it's a strange phenomenon. We certainly have more visibility than you'd get in a Camaro, but not as much as you'd get with a mid-engine sports car like a Cayman. When it comes to interior features, the base model, the 3.0, comes with a small entertainment system, a lower power stereo. It has Bluetooth, but it doesn't have Apple CarPlay. The seat centers are Alcantara instead of leather, which they are here, and a couple of things like that. It also has smaller rear brake rotors. When you step up to the premium, or if you get the launch edition, you get leather interior, wireless charging, Apple CarPlay connectivity, no Android Auto, larger entertainment display with navigation, heads-up display, and so on and so forth. It's nice to know that the majority of the changes are simply entertainment and creature comfort as opposed to performance, so you can get most of the Supra experience with the base model. First impressions of the Toyota Supra, well, it's really fun to drive. So fun that it almost outshines everything else that's weird about the car, from the styling to the very obviously BMW underpinnings. Now, you can spend a lot of time debating what it means to be a Supra, a Toyota, or even a BMW, but I'd rather just spend that time driving the car.